I'm Kayla Barnes from Town Hall, here with Dr. Will Cole, one of the top functional and integrative medicine doctors in the nation, the author of best-selling book Ketotarian, and The Inflammation Spectrum is his newest book. He are also a co-host of the Goop Fellas podcast and Keto Talk.
Yeah.
So we're so excited to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of
I appreciate
course.
it. I love this city.
Absolutely. So we just want to dive right in and talk the basics of inflammation. We know that some inflammation for your body is good and necessary, and other types of inflammation is really harmful to your health.
Yeah.
So we would love to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, so you're right. Inflammation is a product of our immune system. So when it's in check and in balance, it's actually a good thing. It fights viruses, it fights bacteria, it heals wounds. We need healthy, balanced inflammation levels to be alive. The problem is when inflammation's out of balance. It's like a forest fire that's burning in perpetuity. It's out of balance. It's going to create problems in the body. So chronic inflammation is really associated with just about every health problem out there. I mean, autoimmune conditions, inflammatory. Diabetes, metabolic issues, inflammatory in nature. Cancer, heart disease, inflammatory in nature. To even things that to the layperson, maybe they don't think of it as inflammatory, like mental health issues, like anxiety and depression and fatigue and brain fog. There's a whole field of research in the scientific literature referred to as the cytokine model of cognitive function. And cytokines are pro-inflammatory cells. So it's looking at how inflammation impacts our brain health, our mental health. So yes, it is something that I see as a functional medicine practitioner on an hourly basis, sadly. But it's the dichotomy is this: while we have an epidemic rise of inflammatory health problems, the other side of the coin is that we know more about how these health problems operate, and we can start to target these underlying drivers of inflammation to create homeostasis, to create balance in our body again.
Amazing, and absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about the gut and the brain and the connection with inflammation.
Yeah, so to understand inflammation, which it's a product of the immune system, to understand that you have to look at where the predominance of the immune system resides. 75% of the immune system, it's estimated, resides in the gastrointestinal system, in our gut health. So we have to look at a lot of gut-centric components to inflammation, and basically a lot of inflammation has its roots in the gut because of that is where the source of the immune system resides. And then a part of that is the fact that the gut and brain are really inextricably linked through many different pathways, but
which is pretty new research.
Exactly, in the last 10, 15 years, but you're right, even to the layperson, they're just hearing about this stuff. And people are becoming more and more aware of it, and over the next 10, 20 years, I'm sure we'll hear more and more about it because of the richness of the connection between the gut and brain. It's formed from the same fetal tissue. When babies are growing in their mom's womb, their gut and brain are formed together, and they're linked through the vagus nerve, the enteric nervous system, for the rest of our life. So research even refers to the gut as the second brain. Right. And 95% of serotonin, our happy neurotransmitter, is made in the gut, stored in the gut. And physically, if you think about it, the intestines even kind of resemble the brain in many ways. So looking at what is referred to in the scientific literature as the gut-brain axis, or the connection between the gut, the second brain, and our brain, is exciting findings in the research, because it's looking at the gut's influence on our brain, and bidirectionally the brain's influence on the gut, and dealing with both of these areas of health to deal with health problems. So it's looking at a lot of mental health issues, it's looking at autoimmune problems, it's looking at neurological autoimmunity, things like autism, and the connection between the gut-brain axis.
Yeah, that's wonderful and super important.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are probably wondering, how do you know if your inflammation's high? What are some of the tests that you can offer?
Well, you can check in with your inflammation levels two different ways. One is just subjectively checking in with your body. And I actually started the Inflammation Spectrum book. We started out with a quiz, which the quiz is adapted from questions that I ask patients to kind of get a good health history. So it's good signs and symptoms for people to check in with themselves to see, okay, where am I at on the inflammation spectrum? Let's look at brain health. Let's look at hormone health. Let's look at musculoskeletal health. Let's look at digestive health. Let's look at the detox system health and the imbalance or the inflammation that could be going on in each one of these components of the inflammation spectrum. So that's one way to check in. The other way, objectively, would be to run labs. So there is a sidebar in the book, people can check that out, but high sensitivity C-reactive protein, HSCRP, is a lab that we run in functional medicine. We want HSCRP, C-reactive protein, to be under 1. It's an inflammatory marker. It's things like people like groups like the American Heart Association, CDC, they have ranges to look at CRP as it relates to cardiovascular heart risk factors, but there's a lot of things that can drive up CRP. So it's a surrogate lab for something called interleukin-6, which is another pro-inflammatory biomarker that is associated with a lot of different health problems. So HSCRP, homocysteine, we want a homocysteine to be under 7 in functional medicine. And that has to do with methylation, which is this really important pathway or biochemical process in the body that makes proteins and builds proteins in the body, makes for healthy gut function, brain function, detox pathways, hormone function. And part of that, one aspect of methylation, is the metabolism of homocysteine. So we talk about MTHFR and the other gene SNPs that some people have that predispose them to higher homocysteine levels, and measuring homocysteine by itself and looking at that as a way to gauge one type of inflammation. And then looking at ferritin. Ferritin is a biomarker for stored iron, but it's also an acute phase reactant. So in states of inflammation, you can see ferritin spike higher. And then those are what I would call like basic inflammation tests. Anybody's doctor can run those. And then us in functional medicine, we're running a little bit more advanced labs in addition to those ones. So looking at gut-centric inflammation like calprotectin and lysozyme, these are immune markers that can gauge gut-centric inflammatory processes. And looking at those methylation gene SNPs that I mentioned, people that are more predisposed to these higher inflammation levels genetically, and looking at the endocannabinoid system, the ECS, that regulates inflammation levels as well. And people with these different genetic variants are more predisposed to higher inflammation levels. And then, I mean, there's other components too. We can look at food reactivities and cross reactivities. There's a lot of different things to look at. I'm not just, it's not to say you have to look at all those areas, but when it's case specific, that's part of getting answers for some people to find out what's driving that inflammation. So you have to look at mold, you have to look at viral issues, you have to look at toxicity, you have to look at these what's driving inflammation in the first place, factors, when it's appropriate.
Absolutely, and that would be my next question is, so what are some of the drivers? You mentioned mold, toxicity. Mm-hmm. I mean, food must be a big one.
Oh, food is the primary one.
Right, and at Town Hall, we're very strict on what we're serving, but it's not always easy to have access to great food. Where would you start in terms of a low inflammation diet, and what do you think about some of the emerging diets, keto, paleo? There's so many different diets out there. Mm-hmm. What do you think are kind of the best for inflammation and maybe not so great and may actually raise inflammation?
Yeah, well, I would say come to Town Hall and eat. That's one way to just keep it simple because you don't have to think about it because it's all laid out for you. I think it's a learning curve for the layperson to come to a place like Town Hall to actually know, okay, this is what eating healthy can look like. You don't have to eat like a rabbit or like munch on celery to be healthy. You can actually eat really delicious foods and be quite anti-inflammatory and well-fed. I would say this, you have to look at things like grains. You have to look at the quality of the grains as well as the grains themselves, hybridization of grains, but the spraying of the grains, the glyphosate spraying, and just the amount that people are consuming too. Grains, sugar, added sugar. So you were talking about how you all actually measure your blood sugars using the Dexcom, and people aren't aware they're eating these healthy foods, but it's really impacting their blood sugar. And the fact that you guys are using science and data to look at food's impact on physiology is, I don't know any healthy restaurant that's doing that. It's just really impressive.
Yeah. We're fanatical about it for sure here.
It's good because people should be mindful of that. Just because something's healthy doesn't mean that it's not raising inflammation.
Smoothies, juices, a lot of things people
whole grains
are labeled as health foods, but when you look at the data, it shows you point blank that it's really spiking your blood sugar.
Exactly. So if someone's surging your blood sugar up, that's not going to be healthy in the long run. Right. Once in a while is fine, but if you're going to these sugar-burning things day in, day out for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and the snacks in between, because you're probably going to have snacks in between to maintain that energy throughout the day, that is just, it's kindling on a fire. And kindling, you need more and more kindling throughout the day. So looking at sugar, looking at grains, looking at, I'd say bad dairy, conventional dairy, That can be a problem for people. And I would say high omega-6 oils, like canola oil, which I know you guys are doing great things. And something we were talking about over lunch is that a lot of healthy restaurants go so far. They are providing good stuff, which it's way better than the standard American diet.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
kudos to them, amazing. But just because something's better doesn't necessarily mean it's optimal. So I love what you guys are doing here at Town Hall of looking at quality oils that you're cooking things in.
Yeah.
I see it with patients a lot where they'll go to these healthy restaurants, but it's the oil that things are fried in or cooked in that's causing these flare-ups because they're not healthy oils. They're not stable at high heat, or they're just unhealthy for the human body. You'll know from a digestive standpoint, or just feeling more inflamed afterwards. So that's what I call the core four, these foods I just mentioned in the book. And then there are a little bit more expanded ones that for people that are higher on the inflammation spectrum, things like nightshades, things like legumes, nuts and seeds, and eggs. That's not to say any of those foods are bad, but my message in the book is to find out what your body loves and what your body doesn't love. It's bio-individuality. It's the heart of functional medicine. We're all different. Yeah. So I do well with nightshades, but my co-host on Goopfellas, Seamus, he does not do well with nightshades. I do fine with eggs. I know many people with autoimmune conditions that don't do well with eggs. So it's finding out what's your food medicine. So that's really the exploration that I want people to go through in the book.
Awesome. How do you feel about how often you eat? So obviously intermittent fasting, prolonged fasts are pretty on the rise. What is your opinion on that?
I think they're great tools. They're tools to use. I talk about time-restricted feeding in the inflammation spectrum and ketotarian, both of them, because it's a tool to drive inflammation levels down.
Right.
And something that we can enhance something called autophagy, which is cellular recycling, cellular renewal. It's basically our body's anti-aging mechanism. And TRF and IF, time-restricted feeding and intermittent fasting, is two ways to upregulate autophagy, downregulate these pro-inflammatory cytokines like NF-kappa B and COX-2 and these NLRP3 inflammasomes. So it's a great tool. The caveat with this is more doesn't always equal better. Right. And you have all of these amazing tools, and sometimes you get that in the hands of somebody without the proper context and vessel, or maybe they have baggage around dieting and eating and maybe disordered eating, and then they go and take this amazing tool of TRF or IF, and then they are like guising an eating disorder as a wellness tool.
Right.
And I think that's a problem in our community, and we need to talk more about it, because that's not what we're talking about. That's not the tool we want people to come with. But we have to have a healthy balance, and fasting is just as important as refeeding, or should I say refeeding is just as important as the fasting. There's a time to eat and there's a time to fast. You have to find that balance for your body. So starving yourself all day, every day is not necessarily the appropriate way to go about it. So it's an amazing tool, but it should be used with balance and context.
Yeah. I think even with the keto diet a little bit, which
Yeah.
you know, I love the keto diet and I cycle in and out, but I think people can get a little fanatical on that, and it's all about the ketones, and then you're kind of losing sight about what you really need, the whole foods, and you need to be feeding your body still.
Totally.
And not just trying to hit a higher number, you know, on your Keto Mojo or...
Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, it's all good stuff, but if you have too much content and you don't have the vessel to contain it, it really can create problems. So I think keeping it simple, like stressing about all this stuff or becoming to the point where it's causing anxiety or disordered relationships with food, I don't think it's healthy at all. I think that people need to back up a bit and kind of really look at their priorities and really look at, is this good on a mental health level? And am I doing something that's setting myself up for success? Because you're right, chasing ketones, getting the higher ketones isn't the goal, unless you're talking about someone with epilepsy or seizure disorder where they need a proper amount of ketones as a way to manage their health problem. That's different. The average layperson that is going into the ketogenic diet for health reasons, or they're biohackers, or they want to lose weight or whatever reason, they should not be overly obsessed about these things. And the goal, the tool, the way that I use the ketogenic diet is to gain metabolic flexibility.
Love that.
And part of metabolic flexibility is burning sugar sometimes too.
Right.
But in the form of like clean foods, right?
Let's talk about metabolic flexibility a little bit. It's a term that I've been hearing so much lately, but what does it really mean? It
means the ability to burn fat and burn sugar for fuel. Most of us are stuck in only sugar burning mode. Like I said, like whether that's the cleaner kindling of like a whole foods diet, but it's a lot of fruits and carbs and grains and starches and things like that, or it is the dirty kindling of the standard American diet. They're both kindling on the fire. The alternative from a metabolic standpoint is burning that fire fuel, that fire log, that log on the fire, which is a little bit more sustainable, it's long lasting. That is burning fat for fuel. That's the ketogenic diet, is burning fat for fuel, if you break that word down. So that's what I'm teaching people in Ketotarian, my first book, is to tap into this fat burning mechanism. But you can, once you build that metabolic flexibility, like you said, you do a cyclical ketogenic diet.
Like 4 or 5 days on and then like 2 days off, or what is your personal
that's the way that I talk about it in the book. So 4 to 5 days on, 2 to 3 days out. But a lot of women will do it around their period, around ovulation. Some people will do it around like a heavy workout. That's what metabolic flexibility is about. It's not being like this food zealot where if anything lowers ketones, it's the devil. I don't think that that's really the truth, unless you're using ketones to manage a neurological problem or something specific. The average layperson shouldn't be that obsessed about ketone levels.
And plus, once you become keto adapted, it's there's a good chance that your ketones are going to go down a little bit.
Exactly.
So it's definitely not equal across the board.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Even obviously measuring via urine, that's going to go down with time as you become more metabolically keto adapted. But even via blood, you'll see that come down. And we get these questions on Keto Talk and Goop Fellows, both of the podcasts, where people get really worried. Like, well, my ketones are going low. Like, what's going on? And it's oftentimes much ado about nothing.
Yeah. So what is your opinion on sleep and inflammation?
So that's a big conversation that I have in the inflammation spectrum, because it is not just about food. And you have to get the food right. Like, food's a primary way to modulate healthy.
3 times a day. It's other than breathing, it's one of the most frequent things that we're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're all eating, or we should be all eating. Now,
unless you're fasting.
Yeah. Right. But the problem is, if you only focus on that, it's not the only component.
Right.
So we have these non-food inflammers that I talk about in the inflammation spectrum, and one of them is sleep, and stress is another one, and looking at screen time and our relationship with technology. All these things, it's about balance again. It's the Goldilocks principle. We want healthy, balanced inflammation levels. We want healthy hormones. We want healthy gut microbiome. We want healthy relationships with the world around us too. So yeah, sleep is paramount to optimal health. Just one night of poor sleep has been associated with increased HSCRP, C-reactive protein. One night of poor sleep will spike your CRP levels.
Oh, wow.
But yet people, people go on weeks and weeks and months and years of disordered sleep. It's catching up with people on a big level, and we're seeing it because I think there's so much technology and people's circadian rhythms are all off, that we need to look at blue light, we have to look at sleep quality and sleep hygiene, and you're gonna be hearing more and more about it because it's impacting society in a major way.
Absolutely. And even if you get most people don't, but 10 hours or 8 hours, if you're not getting quality sleep and you don't set yourself up for success at night, you're still not really resting your body the way that you should be, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about quality or quantity, it's about quality as well, and actual restorative sleep. So things like the Oura Ring or other ways to gauge how your sleep is at night is a good way to check in with yourself. So I think using technology to our benefit in that way is a good idea to check in. And then you can drop it when you want to drop it and just keep it simple, which I like to do it that way. But it's good to check in with yourself. If you feel tired, if you feel fatigued, if you feel like you're not getting good enough sleep, check in with yourself. Use these technology apps and just pieces of technology that can show you how you're sleeping at night.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Will, we are so grateful to have you here tonight. We're super excited for the talk that's going to follow. Please tell us where everyone can get your book, follow you, and thank you again for coming.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much for having me. Everything's at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com. They can get the inflammation spectrum there, that links to Amazon and Barnes & Noble, all those places, and on Instagram, I'm at drwillcole.
Perfect.
on all the handles.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks so much for having me.